Stephon Castle is making a Spurs trade deadline move more likely by the day.
Go, Spurs, go, 'cause the Giants stay.
What is up, San Antonio Spurs fans? Welcome to TSR Sports. Caught an article from Air Alamo, but before I do so, there's questions I have in regards to moving on from Chris Paul and starting Stephon Castle. How much of an influence is Chris Paul having on Castle's game? Would it be better for Castle and the rest of the Spurs for Paul to stay to the end of the season? And the big one that I've been asking myself, will Chris Paul still want to stay with the Spurs if Greg Popovich does or can't come back as head coach? We'll wrap that up at the end, but first let's get into the article from Air Alamo. Castle taking advantage of his opportunity at every turn. After Jeremy Sohan went down with an injury, the Spurs promoted Castle to the starting lineup. In his 6 games as a starter, he's averaging 13.6 points, 4.1 assists in 29.5 minutes per game. If you take away that first dud of a game he had in the last 5 games, his shooting splits are 50-41. That's right, 41% from 3, the biggest knock on his game, and 74% from the line while averaging 16 points and 5 assists as a secondary ball handler. So yeah, good things are happening. And sure, Spurs fans, those stats might not blow away outsiders, but it is clear that Castle's going to be a good player for a long time. His activity level in defense and his ability to attack the paint and create for others have made him an intriguing player. And we saw that last night. We saw Castle drive into the paint. The defense started to collapse on him. He throws it up for an alley-oop to Wemby. That is something we might see a lot of in the near future. Also, one to continue to earn significant minutes as the season progresses. That may be hard to do, though. With Devin Vassell back in the rotation and Tre Jones and Jeremy Sohan eventually returning. We have no update on Tre Jones whatsoever. He's been out for over 3 weeks. The original diagnosis was 2 weeks, so I don't know what's going on with him. And then Sohan, we might not see, unfortunately, until maybe January next year. With those guys returning eventually, that does put a cap on its potential to earn minutes, unless, of course, the Spurs consider moving starting point guard Chris Paul around the trade deadline. This is something we on this community have talked about a lot. Paul and/or Barnes being traded before the deadline. Could it happen? Should it happen? That would probably be a mistake given how Paul has helped to mentor the young Spurs, but the San Antonio Spurs are in the latter status of a rebuild, and playing time is a must for their best young players. Agree 100%. We're a fringe play-on team. We're not a finals team. Let the young guys play, like we do at Wemby, like we do at Sohan the year before. Let them play. If Castle continues to play well, and I have a reason to believe that he will, then the Spurs should find as many minutes for him as possible, and that is unlikely to come from the shooting guard position with Vassell there, which Vassell will be back in the starting lineup, I'm sure, at some point. They're also, by the way, Vassell and Johnson, they are not playing well together off the bench. I saw an article, Pounding the Rock, they're plus-minus right now together for the year. Limited sample size is like minus 70. It's bad. It's really bad. That means for Castle, he may have to play point guard to average at least 30 minutes per game. Should the Spurs consider trading CP3 to make playing time for Castle? The season is still young, but our Spurs should consider trading Paul around the deadline or even earlier if Castle continues to shine. Paul helping the Spurs get off to a solid start, mentoring the young players, and being traded to a contender for an asset while clearing up playing time for Castle would be a successful stint. And Spurs fans, that would be a win-win-win. He mentors our young guys to the All-Star break. Castle takes over a point guard because he's ready to go. And then we get something for CP3. Actually, it's a quadruple win because then CP3 goes to a contender because the one thing he hasn't done is win a championship in his about 20-year career. So I'm sure there's still part of him somewhere that wants a ring. Ultimately, Castle has played better than many Spurs fans expected, much better than I expected. I did not realize he was that good in the paint and that good of an above-the-rim finisher, but he's showing me something right now. And this early on, certainly exceeding expectations, and the team should look to reward him, even if it means trading Paul. All right, let's get my 2 cents in here. So when we look at Castle and Paul, of course, the biggest thing is the age difference. Castle is 20, CP3 is 39. Castle is much bigger. He's 6'6", 215 pounds. CP3 is only 6', 175, which, by the way, Spurs fans, really raises the question how the heck Anthony Davis was floored by Chris Paul when they bumped into each other. Whatever, let's move on. Castle has a fantastic above-the-rim game that Chris Paul has never had, and his size will help with the bigger guards in the Western Conference like your Luka Doncic's. And as far as CP3, of course, he brings leadership and tons of experience. I asked a couple questions at the start of the video. I think Chris Paul's having an effect on Stephon Castle's game and probably everybody on the Spurs. A positive effect. All that experience he has, yes, he is mentoring our guys and certainly, I'm sure, making them better on the court. But would it be better for Castle and the rest of our guys to stay with him the whole season? I don't know. I think that's a decision the Spurs, Brian Wright and Pop, and whoever are going to have to make sometime around January. If we see the team progressing and Castle keeps getting better. Yes, I know there's a lot of ifs. There's a lot of ifs with this scenario, but we're playing devil's advocate here and hoping things work out for us. If Castle keeps getting better and handles more and more on-ball duties, and it looks like he's ready to take over, then I say pass the torch, let him start. He was drafted to be our starting point guard. He said before the draft that he wanted to be a starting point guard. We draft him to be as such, then make it such. Make it so. Let it happen. As far as the last question, that's a tough one. I could have sworn, Spurs fans, let me know in the comments down below if I'm wrong, that Pop and CP3 had a lot of conversations about what the goals were here in San Antonio, about how Chris Paul is going to start coming here, and if Pop can't come back or doesn't and just chooses not to come back as a head coach, I think, Spurs fans, he's going to stay in the front office until he's no longer with us. I think he's going to want to be a Spur for life. But the coaching thing's different with the mild stroke. If he decides not to come back, will Chris still want to play under a young head coach like Mitch Johnson? I don't think so. I don't know. I think a big part of coming to San Antonio was getting a chance to be coached by Pop, one of the greatest coaches of all time. Many are going to say the greatest coach of all time. I'm not going to argue with you on that. And if Pop doesn't come back, I could see him being not necessarily wanting to leave, but willing to leave to go to a contender. And yes, I still think he wants to get a ring. So drop a comment down, Spurs fans. What do you think? Do you think this could happen? A lot of you seem like you've been on the fence on whether we should move CP3 at the trade deadline, but if this young man keeps playing like he has, and we're literally watching him get better before our eyes, which is what you want to see in a rookie. You want to see some sort of progression. We haven't seen that progression with your Malachi Branhams, your Blake Wesleys, really. We've seen it with Jeremy Sohan from last year to this year until his untimely injury, and we're watching it in real time with Stephon Castle. I think we've got a real special one here. He might end up being the best player in the draft. Certainly has a shot at Rookie of the Year. It's a good time to be a Spurs fan. So, again, let me know in the comments down below your thought on this scenario. Hit the thumbs up, like, support the channel. Subscribe and become part of our awesome Spurs community. And I'll see you tonight for the Spurs and the Mavericks as it's a battle for Texas. Thank you, and as always, go Spurs, go.
Go Spurs, go. 'Cause the Giants stay.